You have everything you asked for, and somehow you still feel like something is missing. And the worst part, you feel guilty even admitting that. The job is there, the people are there, nothing is technically wrong, and yet you feel empty, not sad, not depressed, just hollow, like something is missing but you can't name it. And here's the part nobody talks about: that feeling is not random. It has a very specific cause, a cause that psychology has identified. And once you hear it, you will never look at your own life the same way again. But before I tell you what it is, I need to show you something about your brain first, something that most people never find out. Let's start with what this actually looks like in real life. You wake up, you go through the motions, you do what needs to be done. And if someone asks how you are, you say fine, because technically you are. But here's what's strange. You thought that once things settled, once you had the stability, the routine, maybe even some success, you'd feel something. Full, satisfied, present. Instead, you feel like you're watching your own life through glass. Like you're there but not really there. And you can't explain it to anyone. Because how do you tell someone you feel empty when your life looks completely fine from the outside? So you don't. You stay quiet. You keep going. But something underneath is not moving with you. And here is where it gets interesting. This feeling, this hollow, wordless emptiness, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's actually your brain sending you a message, but not the message you think. Most people assume emptiness means something is wrong with them, that they're ungrateful, broken, too sensitive. But psychology says something completely different. It says this feeling is a signal, a very specific signal, about a very specific gap that has been quietly growing inside you probably for years. And the moment you understand what that gap is, everything clicks. So let me show you exactly what's happening inside your brain right now. There is a psychological process called hedonic adaptation, and it is, without question, one of the most important things you will ever learn about how your mind works. Here's how it works. Your brain has a baseline, a kind of emotional set point. When something good happens, a promotion, a new relationship, a goal you finally reached, your emotions rise above that baseline. You feel it, the excitement, the relief, the sense of arrival. But then something happens that nobody warns you about. Your brain starts to recalibrate. Almost immediately, what was exciting becomes familiar. What felt meaningful becomes routine. And slowly, almost invisibly, you return to exactly where you started emotionally. Here's a metaphor that will make this impossible to forget. Imagine walking into a room that smells strongly of coffee. The moment you enter, it's sharp, vivid, completely impossible to ignore. But 10 minutes later, you can't smell it anymore. The coffee hasn't changed. You have. Your brain adapted to it so completely that it disappeared from your awareness entirely. That is exactly what your brain does with every achievement, every relationship, every good thing in your life. It adapts, it neutralizes, it brings you back to zero. And this is not a flaw. This is ancient engineering. Your brain evolved to keep scanning for the next threat, not to sit in contentment. But here is the problem nobody tells you. Hedonic adaptation explains why good things stop feeling good, but it does not explain the specific emptiness you feel right now. Because what you're experiencing, this particular hollow feeling, has a second layer, a deeper one. Psychologists call it self-concept erosion, and it is the hidden engine behind the kind of emptiness that comes when life looks fine but feels completely hollow. Here's what it means. From the time you were young, you built a story about yourself, who you were, what you valued, what kind of life felt like yours. Some of that story was chosen by you. Most of it wasn't. Most of your story was absorbed from your family, your culture, the expectations that surrounded you before you were old enough to question any of them. And somewhere along the way, quietly, gradually, you stopped living your chosen story and started living the absorbed one instead. You started optimizing for the version of life that looked right from the outside, the stable career, the practical choice, the sensible path. And you got there, you built it, you achieved exactly what you were supposed to achieve, but it was never fully yours. And now you are living in a life that fits perfectly on paper, but doesn't fit you, not because the life is bad, but because you were never really asked by yourself, honestly, what you actually wanted it to feel like. That gap between the life you are performing and the self you quietly set aside, that is where the emptiness lives. So what do you do with this? Not to fix it fast, not to manufacture meaning overnight, but to genuinely slowly begin to close that gap. There are 5 principles, each one backed by psychology, each one targeting a specific part of the brain that drives this emptiness. And the first one is going to surprise you, because it has nothing to do with changing your life. It starts with something much smaller, something you do in 60 seconds. Principle 1. Name what you are actually feeling with precision. Not "I feel empty," that is too vague. Your brain cannot work with vague. Research by neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett shows something remarkable. The more precisely you can name an emotion, the more effectively your brain can regulate it. She calls this emotional granularity. There is a profound difference between saying, "I feel empty," and saying, "I feel understimulated and disconnected from anything that feels genuinely mine." The second one is harder to say, but it points somewhere real. It gives your brain a direction. So this week, when the hollow feeling shows up, don't move past it. Sit with it for 60 seconds and try to name it more precisely. Not to fix it, just to see it clearly, because you cannot close a gap you haven't looked at directly. Principle 2. Understand the difference between pleasure and meaning, because your brain treats them completely differently. Psychology identifies two types of well-being. Hedonic well-being, the pursuit of pleasure, comfort, and the absence of pain. This is what most of modern life is designed to give you. Easy dopamine, instant reward, frictionless comfort. And eudaimonic well-being, the pursuit of meaning, growth, and alignment with your own values. This one is slower, harder, less comfortable. But here is the critical difference. Hedonic experiences feel good fast and fade fast. Hedonic adaptation swallows them whole. Eudaimonic experiences doing something that genuinely aligns with who you are, contributing to something that matters, growing through real difficulty. These create something deeper, something that doesn't fade the same way. The emptiness you feel right now is often the precise signal that your life has been optimized for one and is quietly starving for the other. Principle 3. Reconnect with the self you quietly set aside. There are things you used to care about before the world told you to be practical. A creative impulse, a way of thinking that felt specifically yours, a question that used to keep you up at night. You haven't abandoned them completely. You've just stopped giving them space. In psychology, this connects to self-discrepancy theory developed by psychologist E. Torrey Higgins. It proposes that a quiet, chronic psychological distress arises when there is a gap between your actual self, who you are right now, and your ideal self, who you believed you were meant to become. That gap doesn't shout at you. It whispers through restlessness, through that hollow feeling at the end of a perfectly fine day. Closing it doesn't require dramatically changing your life. It requires giving small but consistent amounts of attention to the parts of yourself that have been waiting. Because the self doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It just goes quiet. And the quieter it gets, the emptier you feel. Principle 4. Introduce the right kind of novelty. One of the most well-documented ways to interrupt hedonic adaptation is through new experience. New experience resets your brain's attention system. It re-engages the prefrontal cortex. It forces you out of autopilot. But here is the distinction that changes everything. Passive novelty scrolling, consuming, watching creates brief stimulation and then returns you to baseline even faster than before. Active novelty, learning something genuinely new, engaging with an idea that challenges your thinking, having a conversation that takes you somewhere unexpected. This creates new neural pathways. It restructures the way you experience your own life. You don't need to travel the world. You don't need a dramatic change. You need 15 deliberate minutes a day of something your brain cannot predict. That is enough to begin shifting the texture of your inner world. Principle 5. Practice the examined life. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. Psychology explains exactly why he was right. Research on narrative identity, led by psychologist Dan McAdams, shows that the people who experience the deepest sense of meaning are the ones who actively make sense of their own story, not just living it, reflecting on it, shaping it consciously. This means asking yourself regularly, not occasionally, questions like, what am I actually building with my time? What do I value when no one is watching? What would I regret not having tried? Not as anxiety, as honest inquiry, because the mind that reflects on itself is the mind that can redirect itself. And that single capacity to look inward with honesty is the most powerful tool you have access to right now. Let me bring everything together into one image you won't forget. Think of your inner life as a signal. When you feel empty, when that hollow, wordless feeling sits in your chest, and you don't know why that is not silence, that is a signal. It is telling you that somewhere a gap has opened up between who you are and how you are living, between what you value and what you are spending yourself on, between the self that was shaped by the world and the self that was always trying to be heard underneath all of it. The emptiness is not the problem. The emptiness is the message. And the only question that matters is whether you are willing to sit still long enough, honestly enough to hear what it is actually saying. You don't need to overhaul your life. You don't need a revelation. You don't need to have it all figured out before you begin. You just need to stop treating this feeling as something to escape and start treating it as something to understand. Because the emptiness you feel is not evidence that you have failed. It is evidence that part of you is still alive, still reaching, still wanting something real, still refusing to fully settle for a life that only looks right from the outside. And that part of you, the part that hasn't gone quiet yet, that is not your problem. That is your compass. Trust it.